Yay, training 7. Okay, I love this one. So if you don't know me, I'm Meredith Holly. I am a lawyer, power dynamics facilitator, and best-selling author. And in this training, I want to talk to you about implementing a cultural safety code. This is something that you can do even if it's your personal policies, or you can do it as a workplace and implement these policies like a cultural safety code within your workplace. So the thing I noticed that I think is super interesting is that if we're in a workplace and we have exposed wiring, right? Like say there's an open wall and there's exposed wiring, we're not gonna make somebody go get electrocuted every day. And we're not gonna minimize the impacts of what their symptoms are when they get electrocuted. But I have clients who come to me all the time who tell me they got 2 hours of sleep in the last week. One client told me the other day that her doctor literally told her if she went back to work the next time she experienced a symptom like she experienced, she could die. And yet, clients come to me all the time and they're like, but I don't know, I can't take a break. It's probably not real. Nobody's going to believe me. But they're having these symptoms of like sleeping only 2 hours in the week, like literally having seizures or such high blood pressure that they're at physical risk, or panic attacks that are debilitating. Like these symptoms are like so much more extreme than most of what people experience if there's exposed wiring and you even get electrocuted. But we don't take it seriously because it's based in our cultural health, not in our external physical environment, even though the impacts on our physical health are more extreme sometimes. So, for example, I was working on this case, and the employer did an investigation. And so my client reported that a coworker was groping her. And the employer did this investigation, and every witness agreed that they had seen the man grope my client. But one witness said that she laughed and then she slapped him on the butt back. And so the employer found it inconclusive and said that there were, I think even the man agreed that he had groped her, but I could be wrong about that. Inconclusive because she may have laughed and slapped him on the butt. And I thought that that was so fascinating because they are basically saying that it's okay in their workplace for people to get groped. And that the only problem comes if like somebody's offended about it. And this points to me to this problem that I see pretty consistently with people when they're in conflict situations. So a lot of people come to me and they say, I told my boss that when he yells at me, it hurts my feelings, right? And I always think, I just advise people not to approach things in that way, and because it makes it sound like your feelings are the problem instead of the other person's behavior, which is the same as what this investigation did, right? So this investigation said that the behavior was okay as long as her feelings weren't hurt, instead of just saying this behavior is not okay. And we don't do that with like electrical wiring, right? We're not like, oh, it's okay to have exposed electrical wiring at work as long as your feelings aren't hurt about it. So I think it's so fascinating that we don't have these codes. And I think that a lot of times they get stigmatized and called like political correct, whatever what's the derogatory term that people have for like social justice warrior. Like people get demeaned for wanting to have cultural safety codes. And yet the symptoms that people experience when we don't have cultural safety codes are often more extreme than the symptoms that people experience from like physical, where we do have physical health safety codes. We do have like safe regulations, right? About how to keep people from injuries in the workplace. So I always ask people, when they're thinking about their own experience at work, when you are thinking about your work and you're sort of like, it's not that bad, if I ignore it, it'll get better. When you're thinking these things, would you be thinking that if you were being electrocuted every day? I don't think so. And so I think if we can separate our feelings from the behavior that we're experiencing, we can be more effective in creating even personal policies for the behavior we tolerate and the behavior we don't tolerate. And so that involves being willing to feel negative feelings and treat that as separate from the behavior that you're experiencing. So, for example, somebody like in this workplace scenario, this coworker groping another coworker could be deemed inappropriate and unsafe in a workplace setting, even if my client didn't have her feelings hurt, right? Even if she didn't feel attacked or humiliated, which she did feel all these negative feelings about it. But even if she didn't, we could still deem that behavior unacceptable in the same way that we say it's unacceptable to have exposed electrical wires that are electrocuting people, right? So what if you took the behavior that you're experiencing at work as seriously as you would take a physical safety issue at work, as seriously as you would take exposed electrical wiring, and then also question what you're thinking that is creating the negative feelings about it. So our thoughts create our feelings. Our coworkers' behavior does not create our feelings. I can feel great and still think that somebody's behavior is unprofessional and inappropriate at work, right? So I think a lot of times we resist identifying and creating these cultural safety codes because we think that our feelings have to be hurt in order to deem somebody's behavior inappropriate. And that's actually not true. So your feelings are always valid. Every feeling is valid, right? And the thoughts that you're thinking that are creating your feelings are probably reasonable, and you probably have evidence of them that make them reasonable. But that is a separate question than whether somebody's behavior is appropriate or not based on what we want to have as a cultural safety code. So for example, sometimes we look at mean joking, right? Like when I'm talking to employers about creating employee handbooks, one of the things that I say is I think that 3 rules of work that every workplace should have are be kind, be respectful, and do your work, right? Like everybody, and if our behavior is falling below those expectations, then it's something to take a serious look at, right? If we're not being kind, if we're not being respectful, if we're not focused on work, we know that there's a drag on our energy. And the research shows that one incident of rudeness from a supervisor makes employees 25% less productive and less effective. So really, when we're having these cultural health standards, it's like the electrical wiring has to be behind a wall standard, right? Like it's possible that if there is exposed electrical wiring that I'm not going to get electrocuted, right? But that's not the standard that we hold. And in the same way, when we're creating a cultural health standard, we want to make it more, we want to gravitate towards safety, not towards the minimum baseline of what people are willing to tolerate, right? So we want to say, be kind, be respectful, do your work, not be as non-discriminatory as possible, right? We want to say that we're anti-discrimination, not just that we try to minimize our discrimination. And then it falls on you to prove if we're being discriminatory. So when you're creating a cultural health code, even for your personal policies, you want to think about what is your ideal life? What is your ideal workplace? What is the behavior that you want to bring into your life? And how are you compromising on that? What are the specifics of it also, right? So I had this one experience with a friend who would make plans for lunch and then he would cancel like 10 minutes before we would go to lunch. And I was thinking about it and I was like, it's not really, he's not being violent to me. He's not intending even to be inconsiderate, but this is not behavior that I want to include in my life. And how am I gonna make sure I move towards the behavior that I do want to include in my life? And that doesn't mean that I lose this friendship or anything, but how do I make sure that I surround myself with respect, that I surround myself with the kindness that I want to see in the world? One of the ways that you have to do it, though, is validating your own feelings and separating those from the other person's behavior. So our feelings are created by our thoughts, and a lot of times they're unconscious thoughts. So the back part of our brains really is having 60,000 thoughts, all these electrical wiring. So like just me moving my hand, I'm not thinking about it, right? I'm not intentionally using my prefrontal cortex to think about moving my hand. I'm just automatically doing it, but my brain is still creating that, right? So our unconscious brain communicates with what's called our limbic brain, and then that releases chemicals into our body, and that's what we experience as feelings, is the chemicals released in our body. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no feeling, no chemical released in your body that's like unfair or not valid, right? But what you want to do is let that be fair, however you're feeling about a work environment or somebody else's behavior. Allow it, process it, and then understand that that is separate from creating the code that you want to create. So for example, with my friend who always canceled 10 minutes before, I wanted to still make lunch plans with this person because I liked him. I wanted him to still be my friend and I wanted to include him in my life. And then I had to make plans around his behavior, expecting him to still have it, that still set consequences that protect me. In order to do that, I had to feel my feelings first. And that's the terrible part, right? I had to feel my feelings, validate my feelings, just identify what do those chemicals feel like in my body and validate that's okay. And then look at what are the thoughts that are creating those feelings. And the reason for this is that when I had that experience, I felt rejected or lonely, and those feelings were not going to motivate me to enforce the cultural health code that I wanted to create. So in order to enforce our cultural health code, we want to be deliberately choosing the feelings that we're going to create that we think we deserve as our own bosses, as the person who's responsible for our work environment, and then take action to enforce our code from that place. And that requires validating and processing the feelings that we're already having before we move forward. If we're spending a lot of our energy resisting the feelings that we're already having, a lot of times it seems like the person who is not following our code is in charge of those feelings. We're giving them power over our feelings. When we can take back power over our feelings and process them, we can enforce our cultural health code and be way more specific about the behavior that we do or don't want to tolerate, and not have it just be based in the feelings that are coming up for us. If we're willing to feel negative feelings and we're willing to experience painful feelings and also enforce our cultural health code, then we can really take action to create the work environments that we want. So thank you all for listening to this training. I am planning to be back again tomorrow with a few more, and then we'll go for 30 for the rest of the month. Yay! And if you know somebody who needs help at work, encourage them to visit erisresolution.com/power dynamics for a longer training on what we teach all of our clients and how to impact your work environment to really create a safe space and the exact work environment that you want. So that's Eris, ERIS, resolution.com/power dynamics. Thanks, y'all.